on the face of this earth that can keep you out of hell. It's not Baptist, it's not Methodist, it's not Presbyterian, it's not Catholic, it's not Jew. There's just one name that can keep you out of hell, and it's the name of Jesus.
Lighten up, Francis.
Hey, anyways, welcome back. My name is Mike, and this is the Atheistville Ask an Atheist, episode 3, I think, 3 or 4. And we have a very special guest, a friend of mine from more number of years than I care to think about. Right? God, it's like 20 years, probably.
No, it's actually 20, at least 22, maybe 23.
Jesus.
Yeah.
So this is Scott. He is a friend of mine from Florida, and he's also an atheist. I think we both met. We were already sort of out, if you will, as an atheist at the time. Yeah, that's a good point. Out-ish. I think most of us go through a ish journey. You know, we generally, because we grew up in America, generally start out at some religion, various levels of severity, and then it's a slow break. Most of us, even though the realization may be somewhat sudden, the process of coming out, if you will, is generally slow. And we'll talk about that because you and I have similar backgrounds. We're both from the South. We're married, children, blah, blah, blah. So we'll talk about a little bit of all that. Give me a second here. So to get this out of the way, as the title, if you're watching this, you will see from the title, From Alabama to Atheism. You grew up in Alabama. I met you in Florida, but you're from Alabama, correct?
Yes.
What part? I don't even know if I know.
Small town, Southwest Alabama, home of To Kill a Mockingbird, Monroe County.
Oh, wow. Really? Okay.
Yeah. It's a very religious Southern area. The small town I was in, roughly 1,000 people in the city limits. So as you come in from the south end of town, you have to go by the First Baptist Church. And as you leave the other end of town, you pass the United Methodist Church that I grew up in. And of course, south of there is the very conservative, I don't want to say snake handling, but I've heard rumors. And then up the other way is like the little old grandmas that sing without sheet music. And then there's everything else all around it. It's a very Jesus-y area. It's very, very Jesus-y.
Jesus-y, yeah. Now, I'm going to assume, like you said, it's very Jesus-y. Growing up, were you aware of any other religions in town, or was it pretty much just various sects of Christianity?
I had when in such a small area, I had a really weird upbringing where I was like, sometimes spent time with this group, sometimes in this group. Church-wise, I was always at the United Methodist Church, and I really didn't know anyone from the First Baptist Church. I just knew there was another church on the south end of town. Yeah. I think I learned more about the actual differences in the disciplines and the denominations well after I put it all behind me. Yeah. Like when I was growing up in the church, we didn't really talk about that. It's kind of interesting because the religious views around there, we didn't talk about religion at home. My dad was in the choir. He was at choir practice every Wednesday night. His sister was, in the choir. They had the Ruth Circle and the men's breakfast, but it was all about the community aspect of it and social aspects of it. But I never really, besides books given to me by my Sunday school teacher and stuff, there wasn't a lot of religion in the home. Okay. In the homes of many of the people I grew up with. But there's an ever-present shadow. Like there's a little pharmacy in town now, and the last time I went to the pharmacy, there was a God bless this home sign that they were selling in the pharmacy, where they were selling you drugs to counteract all of these maladies that apparently God created. I don't know. Apparently God created the malady. I'm not really sure how that works or how they square those circles sometimes. But
Yeah, and we try not to get into a bashy thing, but you're right. And I say that just so so people don't freak out. We're not going down a road of we're just going to bash a bunch of Christians. That's not the point. But that is the things that you and I and everyone I've ever spoken to on this show and other things. It's those little things that start to just nibble at it. It's like, wait a second. But if it's all knowing and because we always grew up as a he. If he is all knowing and he is all seeing and he controls, getting my job or being approved for a apartment or whatever thing people say, but isn't he also responsible for all the negative in the world? And of course, if you ask that at church, they'll say no. There's all kinds of different reasons. They'll say no, free will and all these sort of things. But it does start to nag at you after a while. Like, but
yeah,
you just told me he is control of every single thing except for all the bad things. It seems a little coincidental and maybe self-serving in some way,
Yeah, and I think for me, and I agree with you. I don't. My intention is not to bash Christianity at all.
There's a lot of channels that can do that. Let them do
because, quite frankly, I am equal opportunity. I think pretty much any religion that has supernatural basis to me is all equally ridiculous. I don't have a reason to believe those things, but like you said, no, my intention is not to bash people or groups. Ideas, come to me with an idea that is worth bashing, and I will bash it.
Yeah.
But for me, growing up specifically in the country that I did, in the state that I did, in the area that I did, it was Christianity. What little I heard about any other religions, the closest were, of course, Judaism and Islam, because socioculturally, where I'm from, those two groups were extremely put down by very bigotous views. People had very negative things to say about the Jewish people and very negative things to say about Muslims. And I'm like, I didn't even know what a Jewish person or a Muslim was. All I know is that, people in the South didn't like them.
Exactly.
And I don't understand why.
No, it's funny you say that because when I was little, I lived in Pennsylvania until I was 11, which is where my father's from. And my mom is from Florida, where you and I met. So we moved in there. But when I was little, because it was the North, we did have Jewish people in I went to Boy Scouts. I had a friend that was Jewish. So I was aware of Jewish people, didn't know really what that meant and didn't know how it was different and knew that Jesus was a Jew. So that's sort of all I knew. Muslim, I don't know the first time I heard of Islam and Muslim. I'd obviously seen movies and TV, Lawrence of Arabia or something. People were dressed, which now we would know those people were probably Muslim.
Right.
But I had no sense of them, and certainly not any good understanding of how they differed and or how they were the same. In fact, some of the similarities I didn't even realize until I was well into my 30s and 40s. After 9/11, and the topic of Muslims and Islam came up much more. So you just naturally started to learn more. And I met in working in IT, I've worked with a lot of people from all over the world, and I've worked with a lot of Muslims and Pakistani, from Pakistan and stuff like this. And I got to find out more about their religion, just osmosis, so to speak. But as a kid, no, I don't know if I ever heard the word Muslim as a little kid ever. I had no sense of it.
Yeah, I
heard
do remember
Mormon before I heard Muslim.
We had a National Guard armory, and for anybody that knows anything about the United States military, they usually send the National Guard out before they send the regular army out.
Yeah.
So because of that, there was a lot of Soldier of Fortune magazines and pro-military magazines being sold, and of course at the time, that was when we were in Lebanon and places like that. So a lot of that was religious in nature. So that's kind of what little bit of even hearing the word Muslim or Sunni or Shiite was just through anti-Islam, almost military sentiment. It was really weird.
Yeah. I was noticing Owl and the Prowl said strange thing early on, the so-called KKK were strongly against Catholics.
Yeah.
So it's funny, and I remember, not remember because I wasn't alive, but with JFK being elected, it was the first Catholic. Yeah, and even within the sects of Christianity, there's these sort of opposing forces, you know?
And now we've got kind of a weird thing where we have an American in the papal office now. So
yeah, and he's from Chicago, which is, and I was actually talking to someone not too long ago who went to his church. And it was interesting, you know, and even though you and I are not believers, it's still pretty neat. I mean, that's pretty cool. I was like telling somebody, like, imagine if you're the one that got married by that local priest and now he's the Pope. I'm like, well, we can't get divorced now. We're buying this thing out.
I don't think they were supposed to get divorced to begin with, but now it is added pressure.
That's the American side. We're going to get divorced anyways, you know? So get back to it. So, okay. So you're a little kid. I don't know. When did you move to Florida? When you were older as an adult, right?
Oh yeah. No, when I moved to Florida, my kids were already school age.
Okay. I didn't remember where you met, your ex-wife and your,
we went to high school together again, very small town.
And, lovely woman. I've known you both for forever. So tell me then, living in this small town of Christians, essentially, is throw a rock, you're going to hit a Christian, right? What was your first start? What was the first thing you did that started, or first thing that came to mind that made you start to seriously question, not just like, well, that's an interesting question, and then just left it, but start to think, this isn't right. Something's not jiving here.
Because of the culture of the area, there was a lot more about teaching you what to think than it is how to think. Mm-hmm. So when it came, this guy was swallowed by a whale for so many weeks or whatever.
Long weekend.
It's just like, okay, because you're that person of authority has told me this. The person that I've been told since I was born that has authority over knowing these things. You don't question them. They just, do. Mm-hmm. All of these animals on this boat. Well, somehow God made it happen. Well, that's good enough for me. God made it happen. And there were a lot of times that I just questions I couldn't answer typically went the standard, the Lord works in strange and mysterious ways. That's always the answer. So there wasn't a lot of ability to question. There wasn't a lot of impetus to make those decisions for yourself.
Right.
So depending on my age, like about 12 years old, I think anytime I could talk my dad into going to visit the cousins down in Mobile instead of going to church on Sunday because they were his favorite cousins. That was my way of getting out of going to church. I mean, I liked the cousins, don't get me wrong, but I would about every 4 to 6 weeks, I would say, hey, Dad, it's Sunday. Why don't we go down to Mobile and visit the cousins instead of church? Right.
But was there any one thing that was the biggest one, the one that's like, this is wrong? Not just, I don't know this is right, but this is wrong.
Yeah.
Something's wrong here.
Yeah. So as a kid, I was just con artist was kind of my thing. I loved learning about con artists. Mm-hmm. Abagnale, Fred DeMera, Yellow Kid, Victor Lustig, just from a very young age. Yeah. Which is why I got into mentalism and hypnosis and stuff like that. So I think I was already driving, but I was still in high school, and I was going to we were United Methodist. So I went to the United Methodist Youth Fellowship, and we had the young youth pastor, and we would go places, and we were listening to the Christian music and stuff. And I went down with him as a lay witness on a youth trip. Because, if I try to be in a group, I'm going to make sure I'm doing everything right, knowing what I'm talking about, and trying to be the best for the group, which is I later found out was part of a mental health issue that I had. So we're down there, and it's the night, the next to the last night, middle of the night. I'm staying up with the youth pastor and his buddy and one of the musical prophets that was there visiting. And this is one of the prophets that God gives them messages about you, and this is what you need to do with your life. And man, like I said, middle of the night, I've been listening to all these things all day, and it was just, I was having these feelings and emotions, and he started talking. And at some point he asked me a question, and the way he phrased the question I realized was what mentalists refer to as fuzzy facts. It's a mentalism type of a thing. So I really started paying attention, and I noticed some very, I noticed the same type of questions and comments that you would get from a psychic.
Really?
Or, you know, and I got to where I would purposefully go a different way than was the truth. Okay, fine. I lied. I bore false witness to the prophet just to see. And sure enough, every time I would agree, he's like, yep, that's what I've been told. And this is what you need to do. And like going completely away from the truth. And that was like my first time that it just really hit me going, if this is real, that would not have been his response.
Right.
If he was talking to an almighty creator, then either that almighty creator is not almighty, or he's not talking to an almighty creator.
And how old were you about that?
Late teens, still in high school, but I think I was driving.
Okay.
And I think at that point, it really hit me. What am I believing and why? Do I have the good reasons to believe these things?
Yeah.
Because up until that point during this trip, I knew I had all the good reasons for these things because of the way I felt.
Yeah.
But when the rubber hit the road, when I put the emotions aside and started using logic, reason, and skepticism, it just, yeah. And after that, I was kind of down the path of seeing if I had reason, and I realized that I didn't. And it just, at that point, I was kind of done.
Yeah. Now, since you were in a small town, I don't even know, do you have brothers or sisters, or are you only child?
I have a younger brother.
Okay.
My brother was kind of in the same circle, but a little bit younger than me.
Okay.
He actually was on his way to the ministry.
Oh, geez. So at home, who are you going to ask these questions to, or who did you discuss, or did you discuss these things in your head?
Yeah, that was part of the bigger issue. When I was 12, we had confirmation, which is 40 years later, I'm still not 100% sure what it was supposed to be. Yeah. I remember the preacher coming and asking us questions, having one-on-one sit downs about what we felt about the Bible. And, I'm a 12-year-old trying to impress the pastor who knows everything. So, the Bible's a rule book on how to do this and that. And he was like, well, that's not entirely right. And somehow I still got confirmed. But what I knew was there were a lot of things going on in my life and about my person that in that book that they have me reading, multiple reasons I should be put to death. Yeah. So the guy who is in charge of reading from the book that says in multiple places that I should either be stoned to death, whipped to death, or just some sort of put to death, that's not the person that I could talk to,
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I was talking to my mom just a couple years ago, I guess, just as a casual conversation, and she lives in the same town we grew up in, or we lived in, and she goes to a church up north there in a little town, a smaller town, than even that. And they were talking about, it was school shootings or one of those kind of things that's in the news. And her pastor is a designated grief counselor. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, I mean, kids need that, I think, but I'm curious what your little small town church and the small town high school would think if they sent in a Muslim to also be the grief counselor, because they would lose their freaking minds, right? Because just like you, I don't mind them being a grief counselor or anybody being a grief counselor if they're qualified, and these people probably are, but it's going to be a biased grief counsel. And like you were saying, how can you ask questions of someone whose job it is to teach you all these things from a very partisan perspective, right? You can't ask them for an objective opinion on 3 days in the belly of a whale. They're never going to give you what you and I would say is the right answer. They're going to give you their colored answer for the most part, right? Colored in favor of their religion, which is understandable. But if that's all you have around you is that guy and his wife and the other guy next door and the choir guy and leader of Sunday school, and there's no one, you're done. And we didn't have the internet because we're old, you know?
Oh, no, it was a very small town. The guy that ran the church almost was the next door, and the choir guy was around the corner. It's a very small, compact area. Yeah.
That's funny.
Specifically for Christianity in this aspect, not only is it a book that says I should be put to death and all of these questions shouldn't have answered, the main friend of God from the first part of the book, Abraham, one of the things he was known the most for was putting his son on a sacrificial table.
Yeah.
That specific religion requiring its followers to have that kind of devotion.
Blind devotion. Yeah. Yeah. It's a big story.
And how am I supposed to ask questions like that of a parent who is expected to follow the letter of those laws to that extreme? And I grew up around Christians who would kick their children out of their own homes sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Or just, speaking out against anything that they found wrong with the Bible, living in ways that didn't follow the biblical path.
Right.
And it's like, who do you talk to? There's in that few people. Yeah,
there's really nobody. And like you said, you kind of came to this in your late teens. Then you get married. Did you go to the Navy first? Get married first? I don't remember what your order was.
Navy was first.
Navy's first. So this is your first time out. Where did you first go? Where was your first duty station?
Orlando. I was on Orlando for the entire time.
Oh, wow. So you went to base camp or boot camp there? And
I went to basic. I went to A school, started power school, and then did TPD all in Orlando.
Okay. So that was your first time. And of course, Orlando is not a massive city, but it's way bigger than you were living in. And you're the Navy, which has people from all over the world, quite frankly. Especially the Navy, U.S. Navy is pretty close. We have a lot of people from all over the world in our Navy, which kind of is odd, but it is what it is. So in the Navy, did you have a different opportunity to explore these thoughts, talk to anybody else? Give me that experience.
The Navy was kind of interesting because what we had in basic training for any type of religious experience was pretty much a multi-faith type of a person who, while Christianity may be their main thing, they do know about rights that Catholics give, or Islam or Buddhism, or something like that. So it was kind of an overarching type of a thing. It was mostly non-denominational Christian type of things. Sure. And like most other times, I literally went to the masses and stuff that they had just because I didn't want to sit in my rack. There was nothing else to do.
Right.
It's like growing up in South Alabama on a Sunday. You might as well go to church because you can't go to the beer store. It's closed on Sundays because Jesus.
That's true.
But it was. And one of the things I did notice, being in the Navy was interesting because there was also that dogmatic authoritarianism. Yeah. I mean, I don't, saying the words out loud makes it sound horrible, but it just is what it is. It's that same type of, you have to listen to what you're being told for these reasons. And you don't question it because the people that are telling you to do it just know more about the things than you do.
Right.
Which is, you've got one in the Navy. So if you've heard anything about basic training, it's about breaking you down and building you back up the way they want you to. which is literally a baptism. I mean, they get you in these classes, they break you down and build you back up the way that you should be brought up in the word, in the church, depending on which denomination. So yeah, it was a little unsettling. It was a little unsettling, especially knowing how many people that I was with were literally going to go off and kill people and then go to church on Sundays, for which I thought was just a weird juxtaposition.
Yes, to say the least. And I imagine that's been a problem of military people for all eternity. I mean, ever since there was any religion that had anything against killing people, which I think most do, because it's just a natural human feeling that we've adapted into religions. But then to square that, right, it's always been enough. I don't blame you. You know, wars are wars, and people go to war. That's just human nature. But I've always found that an odd juxtaposition, like you said, to kind of get up one day and think, I'm going to go kill someone today, and then after that, you pray that you didn't get killed. Right. In the same book that says thou shalt not kill. And I'm not even going to try to argue the points because I just get it, but it is odd that they can weigh these two and be comfortable on both sides. Yeah. It's a strange dichotomy that I've always found it very fascinating. And not having been in the military, I've not had to literally have to deal with that, thank God. But, thank God, because I can't get it out of my head. That's what we say. Exactly. Well, it's touching on that, though. It's somebody actually I remember told me while I was in basic, no atheists in foxholes thing. Yeah. And I'm like, when you look at there's no atheists in foxholes, when you look at prison conversions, when you look at praying in front of abortion clinics, when you look at the turnout of church people for funerals, it just that was one of the things that kept adding to the fact that, yes, I see why it makes it easier to believe certain things when you think that you're at your lowest point or that you need this the most and you're desperate for something and someone pops in to fill that hole. Mm-hmm. How much of that is the desperation and how much of that is an actual good reason to believe? Because once I started questioning whether I had good reasons to believe, I just didn't. Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Camel just popped up with a good question. I don't know if I've ever thought of it myself specifically. He says, please ask Scott why there is such a place exists as the Bible Belt in the South. What's the main reason a lot of people are more religious in that area? And I don't have a good answer for that either. Having grown up mostly in the South, I don't know why it's more prevalent and more deep-seated, if you will, because there's certainly religious people. I live in Chicago. There's big churches here, like we just said, the Pope's from here. But the South, it's different. There's a different fabric down there than there is everywhere else I've lived. I've lived California to Pennsylvania and parts in between. Yeah. Any thoughts on that? Oh, I have thoughts. Anytime you talk about Southern history, there is one subject you cannot leave out. What's that? And that is slavery and the racism that came in after that. Yeah. And just from exploration of kind of the history of the religion in the South and stuff like that, former slaves and even current slaves at the time, they weren't allowed to read. They weren't allowed to learn how to read. True. So the first thing that they started becoming allowed to read was the Bible. Well, good point. And not only that, but to facilitate slavery and kind of make it more palatable, Thomas Jefferson and some of his ilk created a slaver's Bible that left in all of the horrendous parts about slavery and took out a lot of the parts that, because it never actually says negative things about slavery directly, they took out a lot of the parts of treat your brother equally type of stuff. So there was literally a slaver's Bible that they would let the slaves read so that the slaves would learn that is like their biblically given part. Yeah. Which is why you have such a rise in
African American churches in the South from former slaves on. And not only that, but they've even branched off, because very similar situation with No Atheists in Foxholes. You're a slave and someone tells you that they're going to teach you about this, this God that's going to help you in a second life, so you don't have to worry so much about this one. Which gave, now we AME churches, which are African Methodist Episcopal churches. You've got a lot of specifically African American historical churches,
for sure,
that are just the basis of a lot of their lifestyle and culture. I went to high school at the grade above me, and my grade, out of like 50 people, we had 3 preachers. Two of them were actively giving sermons while they were in high school.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah.
It's funny you mentioned slavery. I went to a meeting 2 weeks ago or so with here in Chicago for Black non-believers. And I wanted to go because, like you, I grew up in the South. I'm very familiar with the Black churches and the Black community and how church plays a part in that. But I'm very familiar with it as a white person in the society, because you and I both, we, because of our ages, we also went to school with Black people. Unlike, say, our parents, who was segregated. We didn't have that. Certainly not in Florida, where I was, because it was a bigger crowd.
Oh, I did.
What's that? Well, you had a small town, right? So
no, it wasn't just a small town.
Separate schools
through the 11th grade, through the beginning of 11th grade, I went to a private school that was established in the late 60s. It was it was an all-white anti-segregationist academy.
Oh my goodness!
That to this day still has never had a Black student in a county that is 47% Black. Yeah, I did not have a Black classmate, teacher, person of authority, or person I spent more than a few hours a month with at a time until I was almost 17.
Wow. I obviously, again, I went to public school in Jacksonville, Florida, so didn't have that experience. My little brother actually went to a private school that was like 8 people in his class, so it was a little different. But before that and after that, he went to regular school. But where I was going with this earlier, that's still very surprising. But when I went to this Black non-believers group, it was very interesting, the conversations that they were having, because unlike you and I, and I've said this before, and it's not new, they didn't make it up, where the white privilege that we have allows the atheism that we like to say out loud to kind of be a little easier. We can get into what our challenges are. But when you're Black, that's also, and one of the questions they were asking one another and getting just a person's opinion was, did you feel you were losing your Blackness by leaving the church? Because, and one of the guys that was in the group, he's like, if you think about it, all of the famous Black leaders from, say, Martin Luther King all through today are pastors. They're Reverend. The Reverend Al Sharpton, the Reverend Martin Luther King, Jesse Jackson,
and not even Christian, Malcolm X.
And Malcolm X, exactly. You can, and some of Malcolm X and Louis Farrakhan. Still, though, the religion and, of course, the civil rights era in the 60s here was born in churches. So to leave that, they're giving up quite a bit. Outside of, say, you and I, we gave up things, and some people have to give up a big social network. But I never thought about losing my identity, say, as a white person, because that's just not how it works in our community. But within their community, it did. So back to your earlier point that it influences the entire South is probably absolutely true. There's definitely, that is a significant factor, because it's just born out of it. And then going back to your point again, if back then in the 1800s and earlier, you've got white society and Black society, essentially that's it. Well, if one is trying to keep the other one down through religion, then they're both strong on both sides, right? One's trying to survive with religion. The other side is trying to keep them down as an ulterior motive through religion, but they're both picking religion very, very strongly, and it just gets ingrained, where it maybe wasn't that much later up in North. So it's interesting. So I think it was Ugar asked that question earlier. That's a really interesting question. I never thought of it myself.
Yeah, there's a really interesting intersectionality there, because they're most of your social grouping, because you weren't allowed to go. It's like during the pre-civil rights movement, you weren't allowed to go to white theaters. You weren't allowed to go to a lot of white things. So most of the culture around where we were, it was church was the main thing.
That was it. And that's what, like I said, when I went to this group, that's essentially what they say is like, I grew up in the church, and the society and the community went to church. It wasn't really an option. Even if you weren't a particularly strong believer, that's just where your society went. Yeah. That's where you interacted with one another. Even in a town like Chicago, which is obviously, in terms of just sheer numbers, it's still the percentage is lower than, say, white society. But just because there's 10 million people in this town, that's a large chunk of people. You go to a small town where there might be 100 black people in the entire tiny little southern town. You have to group together, and the place you group together is at church. It's just the way it is. And to say no to that is a big, big decision. I'm trying to get a couple of these people that I met that I've become a little friendly with. I want to get them on this same thing, because it was a fascinating conversation. Because again, as a white person, I can only assume so much, and then I'm lost. I have to find out from the person who's lived it. It was really very interesting.
What really gets me with that too is because I've been to AME churches. I've been to black AOGs, and of course, growing up in the United Methodist Church, it's like seeing the difference in worship style, how they talk to, for, and about their God. I don't care if they're using the same Bible. That's a completely different God that's being
conversation.
Put out there. It's really interesting, which is why we have like tens of thousands of denominations.
Yes, it is. That's always very interesting to me as well. You have the same Bible, although there is no same Bible, because there's 50 different versions of that, even whatever. There are millions of versions, seems like. But even though, let's just say we had one Bible, why do we have all these different religions that they're slightly different than the last one and reading the same? Because it's all interpretation and all these other things. And it's a little bit of a la carte, right? You can pick and choose. I want to get back to, because I went sideways on that a little bit. I do want to get back to while you were in the Navy, just because you mentioned, it caught my ear. You mentioned this sort of authoritarian process, and that's military. It's the idea. You got to listen to the guy ahead of you or above you, because they have orders, and orders get people survive or killed. I mean, there's legitimate reasons for that, but you're not taught to question things, really. You're supposed to just go with it and yes, sir, no, sir, whatever, right? With the other people that were also in there, and I know you well enough, you didn't go in as an officer right out of Yale. So you were in there with the basic guys. Were you able to come out at all as non-religious, let alone atheist, or was that even not you yet? Because
of other factors of my childhood and my relationship with religious doctrine, I avoided talking about it. I have some mental health issues that are deeply rooted in identity disorder, which has a lot to do with religious trauma and me versus what a person is supposed to be. So no, for the longest time, it was not a subject that I would even broach with anyone who didn't already flagrantly come out and say something to the effect of Christians are just the dumbest people in the world. Then I can say, okay, this might be somebody I can at least give my opinion to. Right. Until that point, it was just so feeling like I would be judged for anything I say. Yeah. Like even to the point of, if everybody else is bowing their heads, in my own head, I was taught that it was disrespectful for me not to bow my heads with them to the God that I didn't believe in, type of a thing. So it was because of the conditioning and a lot of the other stuff like that. I didn't come up in conversation. Yeah. Well, okay. If it did, I would just be like, okay, just play along. Just smile and nod. Yeah.
like we still do sometimes at Thanksgiving or whenever, when there's a group of people. And
Yeah.
again, we said this at the top of the hour. I'm not here to bash Christians. I know we've probably offended somebody at this point, but most of the people I love in this world are Christian. Most of the people I know in this world are Christian. The people I've always loved, my grandparents and people that have passed, they were Christian. So I have nothing against Christians. I have a problem sometimes with the religion, but not them because they're Christian. Now, sometimes because they're Christian, they do things I don't like and really dislike, sometimes vehemently. But the fact that they're Christian doesn't make me dislike them. I'm not that guy. I'm fine when I go to a thing, and if he ever wants to hold hands and say a prayer, I'm not saying the prayer. I'm looking around quietly, kind of seeing who else is not saying the prayer. But I'm quiet. I was at dinner the other night. Mary Jane and I were at dinner with two other couples, and at a restaurant, and they prayed before the meal. I knew, and he's a good friend of mine. He's been a friend of mine longer than I've known you, in fact. And I know that they're religious. I know they're very religious. Okay, that they want to pray. It bothers. I'm going to eat in a minute, anyways. It doesn't make any difference, right?
Right.
But yeah, it's interesting.
I'm like you. I really try not to. I don't purposefully offend Christians. I'm not saying I don't offend Christians, but I don't purposely offend Christians.
And I start out to do it specifically.
Exactly. And quite frankly, as part of my deconstruction and going back and figuring out, well, then how did I get here? How do other people get here? Because with me, there's always it must be me missing something, going back and trying to figure out what it is I'm missing. And a lot of what I've come to realize is, man, I hate using this phrase. I think believers, because of the conditioning that is literally written into the text of the Bible and other religious and dogmatic systems, Christian, Islam, Jainism, Buddhism, whatever it is, I feel that they're almost victims themselves of their own conditioning sometimes.
It's funny you say that. I don't know if you're watching the screen. Al on the Prowl said lots of times it's not their fault. I was brainwashed too.
Yeah, exactly.
What you just said. Yeah. And that's true. I mean, you and I and the people that I've talked to and in little groups that you and I kind of hang around with in this sort of thing, we all came to a conclusion, but not when we were two. It took us, you were in your teens, some people are 30s and 40s before they start to click. I talked to a guy not too long ago who's 52, 53. He came to that conclusion 9 years ago. He was a Pentecostal pastor.
Yeah.
Pentecostal pastor. And then he became an atheist.
Yeah.
So yes, it takes a while to undo that. And some people just don't question things, not because, and that's not a disparaging comment. There's just no particular reason to question it sometimes.
Exactly.
And if your life
and that's the biggest thing.
That's
why I try to respectfully challenge when someone just blasts out and says something, and I'm like,
but have you thought of this?
Question.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And Recovering from Religion is a group for people who are deconstructing. And I think they have a side group that is specifically for people who lived and worked in the ministry for decades before realizing that they just didn't. And most of the atheists I've ever come across who spent time in religion, they will tell you that the reason that they stopped believing is because they were legitimately trying to find reasons to believe. And the more they studied, the more they read, the more they asked questions, they realized that there were no answers.
Yes. I will attest to that anecdotally for sure, that once you start to go down that rabbit hole, if you can't get stopped by someone who's well-meaning and keeps you from going further down, the answer is, like you said, get scarcer and scarcer as you go down, and you realize, wait a second, if this doesn't make sense, then that last one didn't make sense. And 4 questions earlier doesn't quite make sense either. And it just starts to crumble. It's like a house of cards, right? Yeah. And obviously they prefer you didn't do that. But and we would say as atheists and within the atheist community, some of the best read Bible people that read the Bible the most are atheists, because they usually start out religious, and like you said, then they kind of delve in it. Let me read this again. I don't think I'm missing something. Let me read this one more time, and you start to. And also, let me read the things that they never bring up in Sunday school, because someone will tell you, "Did you know there's this thing in there?" Like, oh, I never heard that. I've been in Sunday school for 12 years and never heard this thing. Like, and funny, a guy I was talking to. In fact, it was that same pastor. I think it was him. I'm losing my different stories. Oh no, it was Larry Warren, a guy I interviewed a couple times ago. He was like, there's certain sermons they run every year. Yeah. When you're leading up to Christmas, you're going to get the same sermons leading up to Christmas. You're leading up to Easter, it's the same sermons. Mother's Day is going to have a couple about being good to your mom, blah, blah, blah. So there's only X amount for the rest of the year they're going to have freedom, so to speak, to teach. And they're not picking the negative stuff, not without a really good spin. They're going to pick the uplifting and the good and do the right thing. They're never bringing out the donkey, thing, which she has his member was like a donkey and emissions.
Of course.
That doesn't seem to come up, but it's in there. It's in the book. You're going to skip that chapter. It's a little uncomfortable. We're going to go right on to Noah or whatever.
Yeah. Well, even those same recycled ones, the Christmas one is always the big one. This is XYZ, exactly what happened leading up to that with the, they had to go to Bethlehem for the census.
The census, yeah.
Or was it to pay taxes like the other book said?
Yeah, well.
Now, was he from Nazareth, or did they leave and have to go back to Nazareth? Did the wise men visit when he was a baby? Because the other book says he was like 4 or 5. It's so funny. The repeated stuff is not even.
It's not even the full story of that. It's the choose your adventure kind of thing,
the cafeteria Christians choosing which ones they want to.
Yeah. And it's, again, like the person said earlier, Al said, I mean, we're all brainwashed to that. And brainwash is maybe a strong term, but I totally understand it and agree with it. If you're just told something, talk about indoctrination, you're told something from early on, if there's no reason to question it, you just roll with it. So again, we come back to our original point. I don't have a problem with Christians. I have a problem with religion specifically. Yeah. I want to switch gears a little bit. So you come out of the Navy, you come back. Did you, I don't know if she's your high school sweetheart per se, but you marry someone you went to high school with. Again, small town, you went to high school with everybody. So you get married.
I went to high school with her sister. Her sister was in my class.
Oh, really?
And my best friend at the time was in love with the woman that I ended up marrying.
Oh, okay.
When we were in high school, but this is like a couple of years later. So it was very, very small town. Went to the same church, ended up going to the same church.
Yeah.
Like they went to one of the ones up north, but it was right by where our farm was. So it was, you're always connected to a church.
Yeah. Well, in a small town, everyone's connected. It's a difficult thing. The smaller it gets, it's virtually incestuous. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So you come back, you've already got these thoughts in your head. You're going through them on your own because there's nobody really to talk to yet. Is she a believer when you go back and is strong, and give me the level of severity, if you will, for her belief?
Very, very, very low. I think at a level mainly of my mom and dad go to church.
Okay. Very
I think that was, we never, I think she was kind of the same mind I was, more of this is not something I do. This is not anything that impacts my life. Mm-hmm. We didn't have a very good level of communication about things like that, but it was never anything that we brought up. We never went to church together. We never really had any conversation. Like the closest religious conversation was, my son has a Hebrew name. That's literally the closest thing I think we had to a religious conversation, was coming up with my son's name. And it wasn't even the religious aspect of it. That was it. So it was pretty much non-existent for us.
Okay.
And I don't want to speak for her level of belief or anything like that. Conversational wise, no, it wasn't even something that really came up ever. The closest thing I had was when my kids were very, very little. The grandparents wanted to take them to church. I did not want them to go. I did kind of back down a little bit, as long as it was going to church where they're there with a group just sitting there in front of the preacher, rather than going to an age appropriate Sunday school where they are specifically taught at 3 years old that Noah put things on the boat 2 by 2. Look, using the rhymes and stuff like that. Yeah. Because that was part of what got me to begin with, and I never had a chance to question it.
Sure.
So,
did you let them go though with your mom and dad or whoever was taking them to church? The grandparents?
It's hard to say no to the grandparents. I think.
I know. We did the same thing. Totally get it.
It was sporadic. It wasn't an all the time thing.
Okay.
And the biggest thing for me is, again, listening to the Christian music in school. Carmen was a really big name, and he had one album out where he did a Western song and a rock song and a reggae song. And the reggae song was my favorite until later, looking back on it. The lines are, we must teach them while they're young, Jesus is the way.
Wow.
To our daughters and our sons, Jesus is the way. Put the words deep in their heart. Jesus is the way. So when they grow, they won't depart. Jesus is the way. That is the definition of indoctrination.
Yeah. And we'll get to other reasons why indoctrination is so prevalent in the news here in a minute. But that's exactly it. I mean, you can't say indoctrination about one group and then try to ignore it in your own group, because it is. And again, going back to what we said earlier, it's a family thing. People go to church as families, and you're obviously going to bring your baby, and that baby's going to do something. And 3 or 4 years old, they're going to play with other kids, and 7 or 8, they start to go to Sunday school or whatever the ages are. It's a very natural thing. And again, very unthought of. I mean, you're not necessarily deep thinking about this. It's just what we've always done. I did it. My parents did it. Their parents. It's just the way it is. And someone like you comes along and says, wait a second, hold up. Let's put the brakes on a bit. This is kind of funky. And I did the same thing. We didn't go to church as a family, but when my son would go across town where my mom lives, he'd go to church with her, and he enjoyed it. And I think he's definitely religious. I don't know what his level of religious is now, but when I was more out, he was definitely not. Could be somewhat a bit of a, go against dad. I don't know. But it's interesting. I was like, all right, but I had no problem with it. Come to your conclusion. He certainly knows my opinion, but but let me ask you this though. Given that you're growing up, at least for a while, the kids were little in Alabama, right? You're in this tiny town. How did being an atheist affect you raising them internally, like in the family, behind closed doors, so to speak, and externally? Were you out? Because I was a little nervous about being out, because I don't want my kid to not go to the birthday parties. I don't want people to not come over for the slumber party because they know his dad's a weird atheist or her dad's an atheist, because in the South, it's exactly what would happen. So I was pretty tight-lipped about it until they were well into their teens. And I felt like, okay, you guys are on your own at 16, 17 anyways. There's not much I can do at this point. But when you're 6, they're babies. I got to protect them. What process did you go through on that? I
stood by quietly for the most part.
Yeah.
I was a little bit of a black sheep for the most part. And I had like layers of different reasons that I kind of didn't fit into that whole Southern rearing type of a thing to begin with. So like, by this time I was already exhibiting issues with my mental health. It's one of the reasons I was left the Navy was because of mental health issues that came from religious and other issues growing up. Yeah. And because of all of those things, I was always very quiet about things. Little things I would be really, really bold and brash and loud about. But when it came to things that directly affected me, or could possibly have down my life potential of how I would be treated, how people in my family would be treated, I was very quiet about those. And it was limiting, and it sucks. And all that does is teach you how to put on a face and really lose every aspect of who you are, because you can't be who you really are in front of the people that are supposed to accept you for who you are. And it's soul crushing. It's soul crushing. So yeah,
So,
it was.
Speaking of putting on a mask,
Yes.
your next time you came out. So you and I, and then I said, you said 22 years. You came out as bi. How many years ago? 5, 6? I don't remember exactly how long ago it was that you sort of officially came out, at least that I became aware.
It was the first time I actually came out and said it was 2018.
Okay. So yeah, 7 years
Yeah.
ago.
And that was to, like, even growing up, this is not something I would even talk to my friends about, like people that were supposed to be very close to me, because I was just, all of the grownups around me. I'm bisexual. I've always been bisexual. It's not, there wasn't really a, when did you realize that you were bi? It was just when I was little, I liked little girls and a few of the little boys.
Yeah.
It just wasn't the only issue I had with it was, again, the Bible said I should be put to death.
Yeah.
So what's wrong with me? Because this just feels as natural as liking redheads more than brunettes or something, you know?
Yeah.
There was a lot of keeping very quiet about that.
Right.
And being in this is like right at the very beginning of the AIDS epidemic, where the president of the United States is talking about, you know, how gay people deserve to die of this cancer type things.
The
and in the 90s, the one kid that was a college kid that was beaten by two guys that thought he was hitting on them.
Matthew Shepard, right?
Matthew Shepard. And it's just like, I'm not saying that I had a legitimate direct fear of being brutally murdered. But what few people I knew or heard of that were gay were getting the shit kicked out of them.
Right.
And everyone around me, we just knew that all of this was wrong. And I kind of have to put all of that square at the feet of religion and that authoritarianism that creates, because there are no arguments against any type of non-heterosexuality that are not rooted in some type of dogma.
Yeah.
There's just not.
There's not. Not that I've ever found either.
I mean, there can be arguments against same-sex marriage, or as we like to call it, marriage. But you know, you can't look at things like, there's no reason in physics not to be heterosexual. Look at the animal kingdom, everything goes, you know, in so many different species. So it's like, you can't use science, you can't use biology, you can't use population mechanics, especially in the 21st century. Population mechanics is a stupid idea to be against homosexuality and, you know, non-heterosexuality, because we have IVF and stuff like that. The population is not going to decline because people like playing with different genitalia.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, that was from a very young age. It was one of the main things that I realized, that I stood out against everyone I was around, everything I had been told, everything I was reading. It was the first identity thing that I had that was mine, and it had to stay that way.
Which is just terrible. I mean, it's terrible in so many ways. But then to have, it's bad enough for people that are just, you know, they don't feel comfortable in society. Okay, that's one thing. But then to also think the people that I love, that are around me, that I respect or whatever, once I say this thing, they literally think I should die. Now they're going to not say it that way. Some will, you know that, but I'm going to have to pray for you, because if I don't, you will die. You're going to go to hell. There are all these other things, right? I can't imagine growing up like that. And since you said you kind of knew this early on, you definitely had a tortured process having to deal with all that in such a tiny town and in the United States. I mean, quite frankly, it's, and a lot of places in the world, not just the United States. But how did you, was that any part of the factoring of you leaving, or was that just an additional thing in the back of your mind that made you a relief when you left religion? Did it push you away, I guess?
No. They really were not connected, because given the you don't question your elders, I was always, there was something wrong with me.
Yeah.
That was a normal part of who I was, but apparently that meant that there was something wrong with me, just in and of itself. By the time it actually got to asking the questions about religion, the damage was done.
Yeah.
I had been, I mean, like I said, when I say that I've always been bisexual, when I was very young, like that first going and finding the stash of Playboys and stuff like that,
right.
I found Penthouse Forums, which was stories.
Yeah.
And this is Penthouse Forum, probably 1985 or 4. And, going up, I was very young. There's not a lot to do in a small southern town, and I was too young to drink by this point.
Right.
But I found this Penthouse Forum, and there was a special section for non-straight writings. And I was like, oh, so this is okay.
Ah.
That kind of
a
thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't the other side. It wasn't like reading something like that and going, oh my, I like that, and I'm going to go down that path. So yeah, by the time the question of my belief and what later became very open atheism, it was not at all a factor.
Okay. So
anybody watching that thinks that's it, you just didn't like God because you wanted to go screw dude. It's not. It's they're like connected, but completely separate.
No, I get it, but you're right. Someone's going to say that.
Yeah.
They're going to say it, even though you just said that's not what happened. They're still going to say it. Because
where it does come in, though, is that 30 plus years after I realized that I did not have any reason to believe these things, still dealing with a quarter of a century of growing up in this area, working in construction since I was a young teenager, because my dad was in the construction. So I was on construction sites with grown men, and you just, all of those, it's like you learn to just push it down and push it down and push it down and push it down and push it down. For the past week, I have been dreading this interview, this conversation, specifically because me even being able to vocalize that still has the impact that I am doing something wrong.
Does it?
Just by talking about it, that I should be embarrassed to talk about it, which when you have that type of internalization of things, it affects my entire life. I never had a best friend that I could talk to about this.
Yeah.
And you can't have good systems of communication with people when you can't tell them or even talk about something that is just such a part of you.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that comes from that dogmatic, authoritarian mentality that says, okay, fine, maybe you don't deserve eternal damnation, but what you're doing is wrong. Why?
Yeah.
You're on your third divorce because you couldn't keep it in your pants down in Pensacola. Why are you telling me that the thing I'm doing with adults and trying to, why am I wrong? Why? Right. And when you grow up not being able to talk about things like that and not being able to question things like that, you have no basis for communication. And the absolutely wonderful woman that I am with now, we purposefully and constantly work on communication. And even, I don't even remember when I first talked to her about it, and she was like, oh, okay. And I'm like, because I'm like, literally, it is ripping my soul apart just to say, okay, we need to talk about this thing. And they're like, okay, is there more, or,
and by the way, pass the potatoes. Cause I don't know where we're going with the conversation. Yeah. Exactly. It's funny, when my daughter came out, we always say the same thing. It's like, first of all, you and I both were in theater. It's like, if you're going to come out to someone, and same thing with the woman that you're with now, it's like, if you're going to come out to somebody, the theater people are the first you should come out to, because they're the easiest to get to, because they're fine with it. And when my daughter came out, we're like, okay, it's not what we expected for your life, but all right.
Yeah.
Okay. Pass potatoes, and it's a shame though, because you and I, I know your children obviously, but if one of them were to come out to you, you'd be very much like me, like, all right, maybe not how I saw your life going, because we all, oh, a little girl's going to get married. Well, all these things, we see these things, right? But okay, just switch gears and go a different direction. I'm fine with that. So many people, though, you mentioned kids being kicked out. When my daughter was in high school, we had kids sleeping on our couch constantly because they would come out as gay, because she went to art school, so that she knew more people that would come out, and they would come out to their southern redneck family and they would kick them out. And my daughter just bring them home like strays. They'd be sleeping there for days, weeks, whatever, because it was like, all right, it doesn't bother us, but like, how dare they kick their child out because they've pretty much, a lot of times, they've just said they're gay. They even haven't done anything about it yet. They've just said they were, and got to go. And like you said earlier, I will make it a blanket statement, which I don't try to do very often, but 100%, that was religious based. It wasn't anything else. It was religious that caused that whole thing, right? You don't kick your child out for being gay unless there's a religious component. It is what it is. You can fight me in the comments if you don't believe that, but I'm going to stick to that one.
Yeah, and that's one thing. Religion aside, if you're going to kick your child out for being gay, kick your child out for being trans, don't have children.
Yeah.
For the love of all of whatever you find holy, do not have children. It's not freaking Build-A-Bear. That's one of the things, growing up in a similar situation where there was the authority of what the parents and children and what that was supposed to be. Like, even growing up in that social structure, I had no way of communicating with my own children. It was like, I tried to impart good things to them and things like that, but I didn't even have really good lines of communication with my own children to where I don't think I ever gave them the sense that they shouldn't come to me with anything. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I don't think I ever gave them the sense that they could come to me.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I think every parent has something they look back like, what was I thinking? Why didn't I do that differently? It was so obvious now. That's why you get a second shot with grandkids, right?
Exactly.
You can let all the things you did wrong. And, you're trying to get through your own life half the time, as you did. And I've been, you kind of hit these phases that you kind of get established in your 40s and 50s. Like, all right, I got a good sense of what I am now. But when my kids were babies all the way through moving out, I didn't know what the hell was going on. Let alone how to make them happy and do their things correctly. I'm going to make mistakes and like, all right.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I can't tell you how many times I've stopped myself from writing a 20-page diatribe. Like I'll go through something in my brain and go, "Dear son, here is where I screwed up. Do not
I'm
do
so sorry.
this."
Yeah, I know it.
It's constant.
I know. It's probably like that's one thing. It's probably universal of every parent and every planet or every nook and nook and cranny throughout this whole world. It's like we all do the same process. So at least we got that going with us.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you a question about this because I'm always curious about this. You and I know a lot of the same people, and I know some of them are gay. Or various levels of various variations of queer. Let's just say that as a common umbrella.
I love the queer umbrella term. Yeah.
My wife and I were just talking about this today. It's like it's such an encompassing umbrella. I wish we could just stick with the word because it's easier just to say in the sense that it includes everyone. I get it.
Right.
Doesn't matter what and some people don't like to be pigeonholed anyway. I'm not gay and I'm not a lesbian. I'm somewhere. You're queer. That's fine. And I know it was a slur, but it's not now. We've taken it back. Let me ask you this, and you'll see this in the South, probably everywhere, but we do see it in the South where you're gay, you're queer, and yet you are still going to church. How do you, Scott, square that? Because it's an odd thing to me. I can't quite get it, but I'm not queer and I'm not religious. So again, it's like a little bit foreign. So my opinion is a little skewed, but how do you see that?
I see that if you read the book of Matthew, Jesus specifically says that anyone who divorces and remarries, and divorces for a reason other than having someone committed adultery on you, if you divorce and remarry, you are an adulterer, and you will never see the kingdom of heaven. And yet the most fervent believers in that book have elected Donald Trump president, who is on his third wife. And if I'm not mistaken, he cheated on the first one with the second one, cheated on the second one. Even then, it doesn't matter. By the very words in their own book, he'll never see the kingdom of heaven. And yet they're saying that he was sent here by God. I think, and I don't want to call out my fellow queer people, but I think it's the same type of conditioning. The conditioning is there. The indoctrination, especially when it happens from a young age, is there. And the reason that you try to square that circle is because forcing that square peg into that round hole is easier than dealing with the cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
So making up the reasons, well, that was the Old Testament. Well, Jesus said to love everybody.
Right.
So that's why we're a queer-friendly church.
Yeah. And to be fair, there are queer-friendly churches. I know there's one in Jacksonville that several of our friends go to.
Oh, yeah.
Some initials, and I can't think what it is.
Oh, especially the UUs. The UUs.
The UUs are very open. And I know only a little bit about them. What is it called? The
Unitarian Universalists.
Unitarian Universalists, yeah. Episcopals have been fairly, I was raised Episcopal, which is a very casual Christian, been fairly open. But again, most of these it's still in the book. It's still in the same book that the guy next door in the next church is saying you're going straight to hell. So it's a little,
it's not just in the same book. It's the same God that specifically said you should put these people to death.
Yeah. It's the same God. You're right. It's not just the word, it's the God.
It's just like anything else. I mean, to me, a queer person who is religious and believing that those things can coalesce is no different than the same person who thinks a person can live in a belly of a whale for 40 days. It's just, you have, I think so much of it is that people that have those beliefs and they're just so deeply rooted in that, it's so much easier to literally say illogical things, circular arguments, and just lack of logic to help them cope with the fact that they can't ask those questions because that gets them outside their comfort zone too.
No, I agree with you. I think you're absolutely hit that on the head. I think that is it. And and again, being raised and still living in the South, it's just part of society, and it's hard to break away. A lot of people give up a lot when they leave the religion. It's one of the reasons we have a group here in Chicago that we meet regularly. And some people will say, well, why do I need to hang out with atheists? Like, it's not to hang out with atheists per se. It's like a lot of people left the church and lost their social network. They lost that sense of community. So, and our meetings are not, and I say meetings, and I hate even using that word, but we get together. We go to a bar. We've got one coming up later this month. It's like at an arcade. It's not an agenda. It's just, here's a group of people you can feel free to talk freely. No one's going to condemn you for it. And you may have had a group in church, and now you don't have that. Well, here's a group of people that have the similar thoughts. And because atheists also tend to overlap with politics and some other things, you're going to find some people here that are going to be similar. Just like when you go to church, those people are similar to you too. When you're a religious person, this is the opposite. It's like I said, not an agenda, but finding that group is hard to give up. And there's a lot of people, I know a lot of people that
absolutely,
they will not leave the church, even though they are hardcore atheists in their mind, but they leave. Like we were talking about the guy who was a Pentecostal preacher. I mean, he's leaving his job. His wife, eventually they got divorced because she was not coming with him to the atheist dark side. He had 5 kids that they were homeschooling because they were Pentecostal. And he had to go back to each one of them and say, forget all I just said, essentially. Now, they were grown, I think, or maybe into their teens, but definitely somewhere in their 20s. And he's like, I just raised them all this way, and I got to go back and say I was wrong. That's a hard thing, and most people just don't want to do the hard thing. It's a very tough, and I don't blame them. I understand it, but I can't imagine necessarily being gay and going to a church sermon where they're talking about me specifically, that I'm going to go to hell. I can't tell anybody, but I'm sitting there going, you're talking about me, the person who we all just hugged me on the way in. You're now telling me I'm going to go to hell. Yeah. But I got to come back next week because, it's what we do. It's very tough.
And it's even worse when you get out of that on a Sunday and then family dinners on Thursday night. The same things get, And that's part of the issue I face with that is I everything for me is internal. What anybody has ever seen about my personality is exactly what I let them see. I'm a master of masking. I learned to mask from an early age. I saw something on a social media post once that said, if you're the type of person that retreats into yourself when you're sick, then that means as a child, you had to deal with a lot of really heavy stuff by yourself.
Interesting.
And I kind of followed that path and realized, like I said, this is some of these things nobody I ever grew up with knew about it. And the worst part is the internalized homophobia.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
Like
you and I could go on for this for days.
No, I mean in myself.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You had to repress it yourself. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because first of all, when I went into the Navy, I was on the bus to Orlando when Bill Clinton was elected president.
Oh, wow.
Which means I violated federal law to do what I felt was my civic duty as a queer person to join the United States military.
Yeah.
That's it. Because I had never told anybody about this. This is something else I had just brewing under the surface.
Yeah.
On because at the time I really wanted to join the Navy. And when I got my discharge and came back home, because again, this is still don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah.
Like there were rumors going around that Scott got kicked out of the Navy because he was gay. And I was like, I literally carried my DD-214 discharge papers and was bragging. No, I have a mental deficiency. I'm not gay. How would you say that?
Yeah.
It's the internalized homophobia It hurts, man.
How I imagine, man.
It's something. This is one of the reasons I wanted to do this, especially here on the first day of Pride. Happy Pride Month,
Yeah.
everyone.
Happy Pride, everybody. Yeah.
I was talking to a mutual friend of ours who works for one of the local LGBTQ organizations, and I made a donation. And she asked me about it. And one of the things I told her, she said, "Oh, this is a great donation." I was like, "It's not enough."
Yeah.
Because if I would have had this type of support, this type of places that I can go, people that I can talk to, I would be a wholly different person. I would have grown up with a lot more self-confidence. I would have grown up a lot more sure of myself and my place in the world. And instead, I ended up with a mental health issue that has one of the highest suicide rates of any mental health issue. And, when suicidal ideation becomes just something that exists in your life rather than being able to live fully for who you are, I cannot let anyone else go through what I went to, no matter how much it hurts me to speak about something that I'm still having to deal with the leftover trauma of. I'm supposed to go out and enjoy myself, not feel shame for exploring life and living life to the fullest and exploring what I like about food and what I like about travel and what I like about my own sexuality. I shouldn't feel shame over that. And I don't ever want anyone else to either. And that's just, happy Pride, everyone.
Happy Pride. Let me ask you one more question and then we'll wrap up. You kind of hit on this, but if you were to talk to someone now, young kid or an old person, are we old persons now? I guess we are.
I keep getting told I am.
I know. It's the gray in my beard that's giving it away. Other than that, I'm totally
exactly.
Again. And maybe the bags into my eyes, like, God damn.
Yeah, I thought about that when I turned my light on. I was like, "Ooh, I might want to do this with a filter."
How do I smooth that out? But what would you give? What advice would you give to someone coming out either way, as atheist or as bi or as gay? Coming out, I guess, and I can use that as a broad term. Coming out when you're going against most of society, and I say against, you're different than most of society, but specifically atheism and being and queer. I should again go back to queer. What advice would you give to that person? And would it be different, age versus age? Young versus old.
Man, I mean, realistically, I try not to have conversations about religion with anyone who's under 18, simply because that's their parents' job.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I wish I could snap my fingers and get rid of some of the bad choices and options, but we can't. I guess find community. Community is something that I never had, something I never found when it comes to religion or sexuality. Being outside of religion, it's just a thing that is, I think most of the people around me, either religion isn't as much a part of their life as they do in everyday life. So if you're thinking about coming out as an atheist, or you even have questions, ask those questions. First of all, dogma keeps you from answering questions. Truth is not afraid of questioning. Just point blank and period. If you ask questions that you do not find good answers to, keep asking the questions, because you're going to either get a good answer or realize there's not one. And if there is not one, if the answers that you are getting do not make sense, then the question does not make sense. And it's time to move on. And realistically, just like anything else, because it's grieving especially when you leave a religious group, like you were talking about, and not having that social structure. That is a form of grieving. And you need to take care of yourself, because you're going to have moments of doubting yourself, because, the cognitive dissonance kicks in. You're going to wonder if you did the right thing when people stop talking to you. But believe me, and this covers both situations, when your friends stop talking to you because you come out as an atheist, or you come out as queer or trans, gay, whatever it is, if your friendship changes, then they were never your friends. They were friends with who they thought you were. They were friends with their version of you. And especially for my bisexual friends out there, there's like a whole nother level, because we're too gay for the straight people, too straight for the gay people. And it's just, I am 100% straight passing. Now, don't get me wrong. There are just times when you're going to look at me and go,
Southern or gay?
Yeah.
Could be. And again, you were in a theater, so I was like,
Exactly. It's like, surprise.
Yeah.
Who would have guessed? I did have friends that, like, after I would talk about, talk openly about my sexuality, I had some friends that surprisingly knew me well, even though we weren't close.
Yeah.
That were like, honey, we knew.
Yeah. Why are you the last one to figure this out? Yeah.
Yeah. And,
yeah.
But yeah, the biggest thing is, you cannot live for anyone else, period.
Yeah.
You cannot live for your pastor. You cannot live for a God that does not make himself, itself, herself, their self visible for you or interact with you. You cannot live for your neighborhood. You cannot live for your school. You can only live for yourself.
Yeah.
And when you can't be true, well, oh, wait, oh my God. This is a Vanilla Ice quote from the movie Cool as Ice. You can't be true to yourself. You can't be true to nobody. Word to your mother.
Word to your mother.
Word.
I think we should end on word to your mother, man.
I love it. Word to your mother.
Or was it get with it? What was it? Drop the zero and get with a hero.
Drop the zero and get with the hero.
Yeah. God almighty, we are freaking old.
You are the hero. You are the hero. Drop the zero and get with the hero, because you are the hero.
That's it, man. Well, that's fantastic. Thanks so much, Scott, for doing this. It was a great conversation. I was so happy that you accepted this invite, because I really wanted to talk to you about it. I knew you'd have some perspective that, again, is different than I have. I can only, I can have opinions, but they're not necessarily valid until I talk to somebody else and get like, what's your actual experience like? Yeah. So I really do appreciate this. And I hope it was better than you thought it might be. The anxiety that you might have had, I hope it came down a little bit.
Nope, I can still see my picture there. Yeah, I am still, and that's the funny thing. I'm an actor, like I'm on stage and screen constantly. But the mask is down. The mask is. I'm doing a Phantom of the Opera. The mask is still kind of there. But.
So, don't we all keep it up at some point? But, yeah. But again, thanks very much. I do appreciate this. For those of you watching at home, thanks for tuning into this. This is becoming a regular series. And if you're interested in being on this episode, you have a unique story, I would love to hear it. I just want to get different people's opinion. You saw how it went. I just want to talk to you and find out how your journey went. And some of the same questions that Scott and I talked. How is it being a parent or a father or a mother or brother, sister, whatever the case may be? And how did you get through life with this little flaw that a lot of people see as having, which we do not, which is a conflict in itself. So thanks again for everybody for watching. Until we talk again, it's been fun. Thanks a lot.